Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's EDGEy Conversation. We are going to be diving in as a little group here to think about the question of where the spirit is going and how to follow the spirit and what following the energy means to each of us and how it connects to our work. So just to dive right in. So we talk a lot about following the energy and finding the energy. What does that look like in practice to each of you?
I'm going to laugh, look like in practice. I'm just going to go completely off the other side of where I really felt the energy, literally and figuratively. It's actually how I found my partner. So it's kind of funny where you're not really paying attention. I think that's quite a common probably story for people. But when I first met him, we went out for dinner and I thought it was a business meeting. I didn't know it was a date, right? And so I was chatting with him. I didn't really understand why he was, telling me about his personal life. I didn't really know what was happening. And I definitely didn't think I was going to have a second date with this person. And just as we're about to leave, he touches my arm. And I literally felt electricity go through my whole body. It was unexpected. I wasn't looking for it. I was actually so narrow-minded that it took an electrical shock and energy to go through to do a wake-up call. And so obviously, I'm so grateful that was following the energy, literally, because otherwise I would have missed it. And so I think that when I think about a time like that, although it's not work related in any way, shape, or form, it's really was a huge wake-up call of how I wasn't listening. And so it's just such a moment of awe for me.
That is a good point. I think that a great example for me is that anytime some situation comes up where there is one of those sort of bodily sort of reactions to how you're responding to something, you're like, oh, this is just an abstract normal thing. And yet in my gut, it is telling me this. And I'm a head and a heart person. So I don't trust my gut very often. But every once in a while, it really speaks quite loudly to me and is no, there is a physical sensation that is telling me that this is the right thing. And that is quite powerful when that happens.
Yeah, when you were kind of framing the question, Alexandra, the thing going through my mind was, what is this experience of following the energy, following the spirit? And, I think of, for me, in my experience, there's a lot of parallels between what Otto Scharmer talks about as leading from the emerging future. There's something emerging, there's a leap required. And if there's enough openness, you just know somehow, it's kind of like Carla's experience that something happens. A lot of examples were coming to mind. I remember after 3 years in my settlement charge in Inwood, this little rural 3-point charge, somebody called and said they're looking for someone at a new church development site in Mississauga, and I think you should apply. So I looked up the application and totally not qualified. They were looking for someone 10 years minimum experience, but I'm 3 years into a 3-point rural charge. This is a very culturally diverse congregation, but I just felt this connection to it and knew some people, so applied. And I remember when I walked in the sanctuary, I went just to check the place out, right? And I knew I was going there. And I couldn't even tell anyone because it sounded so, arrogant. But I knew this is the energy is taking me there. The spirit is calling. And it's not always kind of a happy thing like that, but there is this kind of, I don't know, my daughter calls it flow. It's to get in the flow. And the requirement is really the openness. And the mind, for me, seems to be the last one to catch up. You talked about the heart, the gut, and the head. The heart and the gut seem to know faster. than the head. The head is usually going, well, this doesn't make any sense. There's no money, but we're going to hire someone for a property strategy. Like, actually, the head did make sense on that one, but it did seem unlikely. Anyway, those were my first thoughts.
And I was actually thinking of it in terms of following the energy in our work. That was originally how I was thinking it, and how I get like swept up in energy that way. And really what I was thinking of is it's the people around me. And this is going to what Rob was just saying about the head is sometimes the last to follow. Sometimes an idea is presented and I don't really understand all the ins and outs of what's being presented at a staff meeting. But when I can feel the spirit and the energy behind someone else's excitement for it, that's when I get swept along too. If I hear it or feel it from someone else, even if I don't understand it, I want to follow it. So that's, in terms of work, was how I was thinking of following the energy.
There is a sense for me too, despite the unlikeliness of some of these situations, there is this unreasonable sense of it says being cared for or being held or being okay in it. And for me, that goes to the kind of the heart thing, the why piece, because usually my experience of these things is that they are right in some way. They are for something. It's an undiscovered passion and sense of purpose, and relating to calling and making a difference and all of those things. And so it's not like a calculated risk. There's this sense of being carried, sense of being held in it. And that for me is kind of the faith part that comes into it, around trusting those moments, trusting that, this may not make sense in the way the world thinks, but God has something in mind, and maybe you're being invited to participate in that.
Yeah, and I love just listening to all of you, because it just feels like there's almost like this muscle we need to be flexing, and it feels so uncertain because it seems like, oh, I'm just following the energy, and everyone goes, well, that doesn't make sense. And I love when you say, like, that is the leap of faith, right? That is the moment of awe. That is the call. We've all used this language. And so what is it? I get really excited about it continuing to grow, but because once you do it once, I feel like starting to take that next leap becomes easier. And it just, for my story, it just reminded me that I wasn't open. And now that I'm more open, how much easier it is to follow the energy.
Yeah, I think we are learning to trust that in Edge, or maybe we are risk takers in some sense. And so maybe that it doesn't make it easier, but it makes it more likely to happen. But I just remember some things like, let's take 120 leaders to Greenbelt in the UK. And well, where's the money for that? Well, I don't know. We don't know, but we announce it. And it was actually Gary Patterson that announced it at an event because of a car ride. But it just, like, things fall into place when, in my experience, when it's right. And it's not like there aren't challenges along the way. And there are people that don't trust energy and like to cut the energy right off. You know what I'm talking about? But there is this sense too that things fall into place, that God provides. It's just true. Those things that sound like cliches, God provides, not for what I want, but for the things God wants to happen. And when we're open to that, serendipity, I guess, is the word some people use.
As folks were talking, it reminded me of the phrase, when two or more are gathered, God is present. And a lot of the time when we are following the energy, it is as a group. It's like, as Sam was mentioning, it's like one person is like, there's a spark here. And then the others notice, and there's this gravity that just kind of pulls us all together. And that that energy and that momentum is kind of what propels it forward, and then digest it together and decide how we continue to go after that. But like it's a group motion of everybody kind of like leaning into their head or leaning into their heart and their gut a little bit, and then seeing how it goes from there on. So as we're like thinking about this sort of attention to energy, following the energy, finding what the energy is, can you think of a time that things were so coincidental that you felt like you were being looked after?
I have a pretty solid example of this. Back in 2018, I guess, 2018, I had been talking to my husband and saying, you know, I kind of regret having not gone to teachers college, and this is something I've been thinking about. And by chance or coincidence or faith, my boss at my other job called me for lunch, and we sat down, and he said that he was considering selling the company and that he was ready to move on to something else, and he was looking towards his future and wanted to let me know that this was the direction he was thinking, and where did I want to be in that. And all of a sudden things were falling in place. Well, if he's moving on from this one, maybe this is my time. I went home, this was in September. The application to apply for Teachers College opened the next week and closed, you know, a couple weeks after that, or a month or so after, and got in the following winter in February, and then went to Teachers College that next September. So it all just timing wise, really just, it had been, I think, a week before that I had been saying, you know, I wonder if I'm going to wake up one day and regret not having become a teacher. Then I get a call, we're going to have lunch, thinking about selling the company, and everything just felt like this is meant to be. That feeling of things fell in line, and really did truly feel like I was being looked after through all of that.
I have similar kind of moment where I was traveling on a train to Tibet, and then I was silly enough to get on the train in high altitude with a fever, or at least I had a scratchy throat. So as you start elevating, that's not a good situation. You shouldn't be there. And so what ended up happening is I actually went into a coma, and they stopped the train. And they brought a doctor on who only spoke Mandarin. And out of my group of friends, I was the only person who could speak Mandarin. So that wasn't a good thing. I'm the one who's out. So they found another American doctor who spoke Mandarin and English, helped to translate. They basically gave me every single drug they had on hand because they didn't know how to save me. They didn't know what was wrong with me. 3 hours later, I came out of my coma. I was completely fine. They told me about this doctor. I walked down this train, and when he saw me, he looked like he had seen a ghost, and he almost fell over. And he goes, I didn't expect you to walk for 3 days, forget 3 hours. And goes, so whatever, you either have the strongest immunity on the face of this planet, or you're being protected. And I remember I moved home back to Canada after this, and I'd always wanted to start my own company and move forward in that way. And really, that's what happened, is that I was able to be brave because, you know, I had been given another chance for some reason, whatever had happened there. And definitely when, you know, a doctor falls over, looks like you see a ghost, I think that's when you're pretty sure you're being taken care of.
It's funny, I had a lot of life or death situation come to mind too. But maybe I'll go the other way, lest people think we're all living so on the edge that we might die at any minute. I was thinking of when we got into, we hired Chris, and we were trying to get the property work going, and everybody was convinced that there wasn't a mandate, there wasn't polity, it couldn't happen. And yet every time, and it was a fight for sure, it was hard slogging. Every time it got to a point where it just felt like it could not happen. Something would happen. CMHC would do something. Some congregation would come back or come in. Somebody would make a donation to a fund. Like it just seems like coincidence, but coincidence doesn't seem like the right idea. And I'm not sure whether I believe in kind of an interventionist God that just kind of tweaks all these things, but I can only speak from my experience that there were these unlikely things that kept happening. And Chris and I would just say, every time it got really, really dark, we'd just say, well, it's God's project. It's in good hands, not ours. And something would happen. And now it has. Just in case people don't know the end of the story.
Absolutely. Yeah, sometimes it is one of those moments. I definitely know that when I was kind of on a different path before starting to work with the church. And when the position with the church came up originally, it was unexpected. And it was something that my minister had passed on to me. And I really there was a very strong sensation in myself that it was the right step to take, even though it was like kind of often left field, going further away from like this sort of the education I had just finished and like all of this preparation I had done in my life to start a career in a particular trajectory. And it just there was something that just felt right, and it made sense in a way that I couldn't find in other situations that were more aligned with what I had thought that I was supposed to go into. And then I landed here and I've had like the most amazing time. And so I think that, yeah, there was definitely something in that sort of period of time of change, I guess, in my life that helped to land me in a place that was very unexpected, but incredibly fruitful. I guess like kind of along similar lines, like when was a time that you attempted to do something that you thought was impossible, but in the end it happened? What has felt impossible?
This one's super easy for me. This one's easy because we launched Embracing the Spirit back in 2016. And the whole idea is like in previous innovation funding within ministries and various denominations, people were not applying for the innovation funding or were unsure whether or not it was possible. And so we were tasked to, is there actually people who want to experiment? What would it look like to have a culture of experimentation or culture of innovation out there? And so we came up with like these different ideas, things that we could test. And yet the narrative is that, church is declining, denominations are declining, faith is declining. And yet EDGE decided not to believe that and to try and take that leap of faith. And so when we launched Embracing the Spirit, we've actually now funded over 3.5 million through mission service dollars to support communities of faith in experimenting and trying something different. It's now been over 600 communities of faith have started to try things differently. When I go to conferences now outside of that are secular conferences, people are like, I hear United Church is doing cool things. But when I speak with other denominations, they're like, oh my goodness, like, look at, you're way past the tipping point. Like there's so much happening. It's so hopeful. And I didn't know if it was possible because the narrative wasn't there. And yet taking that leap of faith and just following what the next relationship was to the next person, to keep on connecting things and just continuing to persevere and have those conversations and to be hopeful. It's just been such a lovely upward spiral and very hopeful.
I think there are a lot of examples in work where it seemed like this is going to be impossible to pull this together given the time frame. Embracing the Spirit was one of them. Any event that we've hosted or helped host has a lot of the time has felt like, are we really going to pull this off? How great we think it's going to be? Or, hopeful economics was one that I mean, it was brought up, I believe, in January, and it was the very beginning of March, and it seemed like, this seems amazing. Are we going to do it? Is this really going to work? Everything's digital. We're still in this weird landscape. Are people going to be engaged? And I thought it was a huge success. I loved it. I really felt the energy and just inspired by all the participants and speakers. And that is just a narrative that I think Edge lives all the time. Like, I don't know if we're going to do this. There's always that moment leading up to some sort of project, program, event where I have that, like, I don't know if we can do this. And somehow we really do rally together. And it is always that moment of relief that, wow, we actually did it. We said we were going to do it, and it came together. And I think that speaks a lot to what you were just saying, taking that leap of faith and then just trusting the energy and the spirit will help carry us there, and that we'll have the people and the pieces along the way that we need.
Yeah, I'm thinking of so many things. We come up with these crazy ideas, and then, the social innovation strategy, and that very first social innovation challenge in Toronto, and just the serendipitous nature of the outcome. It's one congregation, this great idea, but it was just an idea, and then they won first prize. They had to do it. I'm thinking of when we tried to become a publisher, and a little book called Fishing Tips. You might remember, as we were going through that, seemed very difficult or impossible, and a Canadian bestseller. Like, we published a Canadian bestseller. That's not us. That's a serendipitous moment. But I also want to acknowledge too, because for me, what came to mind in this question was how do I know, right, that this is the spirit and not my imagination? Because there's lots of times when I got really caught on ideas that seemed quite possible and turned out to be not possible at all. And I think you helped me a little bit on that, Alexandra, because if nobody else gets it, if nobody else gets the energy, then maybe it's a personal problem, right? There is a test of that. And the other test for me around the authenticity of the energy that you're following, is this the spirit or is it something else? Is it there's always a change. There's always something that changes me in it. There's some challenge, some transformation, some new capacity that is being developed in me that is part of the story. So if it's authentic, then I've changed. If it's an authentic spiritual kind of calling or following or experience, then it changes you. And so I don't want, it's always looking back on it that it seems so, I don't want to say Pollyanna, but miraculous. It can sometimes in the time, but sometimes it feels torturous. That's why I raised the publishing experience. But yeah, that, at one point others kind of confirm it. And that's when the energy comes from me. That's when the impossible seems to come possible, when that connection with someone else and someone else gets it. And you go, yeah, this is possible. And I don't know how many times I've been fretting over something, despairing about something, just ready to drop something, and then sharing in a conversation like this and realizing, oh, no, okay, maybe this is possible. Maybe it's something we can do, not me.
Absolutely. I think my example of this is just since the beginning of the pandemic, it's been quite profound, the amount of change and the lack of change, both that have happened around. But one of the things that has really that I've thought is just amazing is that every single community of faith has had to like try something new. Like whether we know about what they did or not, every single community in the world has had to try something new over the last 18 months, has like had their lives kind of shaken up a little bit, and you know, tried to still care for the most vulnerable and still have pastoral responses and still feel that sense of community and connection, and figure out how to counter feelings of isolation. And there's been so much creativity, and there's been a lot of stuff that's not great, obviously. I'm focusing more on like this particular feeling of impossibility that, you know, being set in our ways pre-pandemic felt like much more of a hurdle, and now is just broken open completely. So I'm really grateful for this conversation that I've had with all three of you today, and thank you for joining in for this EDGEy conversation around where the Spirit is leading, what is possible, what is impossible, what does impossible even mean? And thank you very much for joining today.